Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Sasha Vakulina. I'm editor-at-large at Euronews. Euronews was an official media partner of the 2023 Concordia Europe Summit, and I'm thrilled to see the subject of trust extending from that June forum in Madrid here to New York this week. I'm pleased to be your official host, introducing topics, conducting polling, and sharing some perspectives into responses to survey questions. You can expect to have meaningful, insightful discussions in the next 4 hours on some of the most thorny issues that impact global trust in institutions, from technological innovation to policy frameworks to cultural and societal influences. We encourage everyone in the room to stay for the duration of the summit, to engage with the panelists and speakers, to share their perspectives, and to ask your questions. On behalf of Concordia and its core trust summit partner, the Knight Foundation, welcome to the 2023 Concordia Trust Summit. Before we begin, a few housekeeping remarks. For Wi-Fi, the network is Concordia and the password is Concordia23. It's also located at the back of your badge. You can use @Concordia Summit or #Concordia23 to share your thoughts online. And we will be doing few polls after each block of programming right before the break. We encourage everyone to participate in those polls. If you were with us in Madrid, you know the drill. If not, let's take a quick look at how to do that. Now, to take part, you go to pigeonhole.at, you enter password Concordia23, all caps. You could see it now on the screen. Here is our test questions. Now, the poll results will remain anonymous, and whenever the question is being asked, you can see it on the screens all over this room. Now, you can see the test question. What do you see as the biggest driver of mis and disinformation within society? Media bias, disruptive technology, individual partisan ideologies, and a lack of individual awareness. So please take your phones and let's do that. There we go. We will be having a few polls, as I said, every now and then, and this is a great way to get your thoughts and to get this interactive vibe here during the summit. You will see also how the results are changing as you vote and as you hear some of the speakers here on stage. Here's the test question. Please keep voting. Media bias, disruptive technology, individual partisan ideologies, and a lack of individual awareness. So for the moment, 41.6%, a lack of individual awareness. And that's what I mean when it keeps changing. This is where you can see media bias, disruptive technology, okay. 31.2 for media bias and a lack of individual awareness. You can keep voting, and I'm gonna announce the first session on the challenges and opportunities of protecting democracy in the age of information warfare in partnership with the US Department of State, a 2023 Concordia Annual Summit patent programming partner. Please welcome to the stage Special Representative Dorothy McAuliffe.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here for Concordia's 10th Annual Summit. As Special Representative for Global Partnerships, I lead an office that builds partnerships around the world, providing the private sector organizations the opportunity to channel their power and resources to help address global challenges to advance our national security and foreign policy goals. And towards that end, my office has been fortunate to coordinate a robust State Department presence here at the 2023 Concordia Annual Summit. In this digital age, it is imperative that governments and the private sector work together to fight misinformation online. We have also seen a resurgence of fake news surrounding life or death issues such as vaccinations, Russian propaganda about Ukraine, and the rise of authoritarianism and threats to democracy around the world. There is no question we must all step up to counter false information, promote digital literacy and critical thinking, and ensure transparency and accountability. And that's why we're here today. I now have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed panel, all of whom have very long CVs, which I will not recite for you this afternoon. But first off, I would want to welcome to the stage, please, Founder and CEO John Gable from AllSides, a company that assesses the political bias of prominent media outlets and offers versions of news stories across the political spectrum. Thanks, John. Next up, we have CEO Pat Kondo from Seeker, a tech company that prioritizes transparency and empowers user choice and control by streamlining access to reliable information. And next, my personal favorite, my colleague from the U.S. State Department, one of the leading voices in U.S. government combating misinformation globally, Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, Liz Allen. And next, CEO Paige Alexander from the Jimmy Carter Presidential Center, one of the world's most effective organizations working to uphold human rights and democracy. And last, but certainly not least, is our moderator for the afternoon, Ambassador Stuart Holliday, CEO of Meridian International. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador.
Dorothy.
I know it's going to be a wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy, very much, and for your leadership. Well, first of all, it's great to see everyone here. This is a subject that I think we're all seized with. And what's interesting about our group, our panel, is that we really have a variety of perspectives represented, from government policy to the technology itself to media and the broader, question of how we can safeguard information from misuse. I was looking at the kind of history of the subject, and it's not new. I think one of the earliest examples was, apologies to my Spanish friends, was the King of Spain telling his people they won the Spanish Armada, that it was a great victory for Spain. Meanwhile, the Navy had been washed ashore off of the coast of the British Isles. So it's not new that governments, individuals have sought to manipulate information. What is relatively new is the speed and the scale at which technology can be used to reach people and influence them, as well as sort of the decline of the three big networks post-Vietnam that you used to go to get, the Walter Cronkite phenomenon, which was, the most trusted person in America. We don't have that anymore. So, Liz, I wanted to start with you, Madam Undersecretary. You should have a show, Madam Undersecretary.
Let's do it.
In your show.
You're going to be on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You lead the country's, the State Department and the country's efforts to create not only connections through exchange programs and public affairs, communications, the internet, but also we are, facing a grave threat, Ukraine, for example, where information is being used that's affecting our foreign policy and our ability to communicate our values, and it's almost seems like the world's sort of upside down in terms of where's the truth. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you all are doing at the State Department.
Sure, and thanks so much, Stuart, and it's really great to be here with everybody. A subject that we think about all day, every day at the State Department. People often ask me what keeps me up at night, and the information space piece of our work is honestly the part that feels the most existential to the future, for all the reasons you say. And I think, to Stuart's point, what we've done really in government and what we're really trying to do at the State Department is get the entire national security and foreign policy apparatus to understand that the information space is a contested theater of competition, right? It is not just a media problem. This is not just a narrative and a content problem, right? Issues of disinformation often get reduced in discussion to content moderation, to calling out, lies with truths. And as we know, it's honestly so much bigger than that. It's about the ecosystem and it's about the environment. So we think a lot about information space and information integrity work as kind of like a four-legged stool, I would say, right? People know that we're, one, exposing misinformation and disinformation, and we have a lot of analysts doing that. We're messaging proactively, credibly, compellingly, hopefully, to get truthful information out there. And those pieces are very often thought of. But what we're really shifting a lot of our focus to is shaping the environment into which information goes. By that, I mean supporting free media. Digital literacy. We just appointed a digital freedom and internet freedom envoy from the State Department because internet freedom and protecting freedom of expression is part of helping keep the information space truthful and stronger than not. So finally, I just wanted to acknowledge kind of our fourth leg of the stool is the programmatic piece, right? And this is something that I think government can do uniquely and with partners, great partners like Meridian. But to be honest, the program piece and doing people-to-people exchanges, doing trainings, treating misinformation and disinformation as a foreign policy issue that we should be upskilling people on, that we should be bringing speakers into embassies and into communities across the world on, and really getting that education piece right is, I think, part of this. We need to make people good education consumers, not just think about the output of information.
Yeah, well, Liz, thank you for mentioning Meridian. We do work with you all on bringing leaders from Ukraine and Eastern Europe to the U.S. on this issue to help train them. And now we have AI in the mix, which of course is the flavor of the decade or the century, which is going to add another layer of complexity. Paige, I wanted to, the Carter Center has this reputation globally for being a proponent of democracy and human rights, and obviously a free and independent media is essential to that here at home and abroad. And I was wondering if you could talk about your perspective on what are some of the things we can do to kind of strengthen that pillar of our democracy.
Sure. Well, thank you. And it's wonderful to be here. I will say the Carter Center has looked internationally for so long on so many of these issues. But, President Carter asked me to explain to him what a bot was. And I just thought, his 99-year-old brain does not need to take up room with understanding what a bot is. But we work in three primary areas on the mis and disinformation. We want to make sure that we're identifying the rules of the road. And this is the legal and regulatory reform pieces. For us, looking at a human rights-centric approach is important because it's very hard to set rules and regulations when you know that that they are going to step on freedom of expression. And so how do you mitigate that by finding the best of the best and then expanding upon those? We're also working on promoting norms. We were in a situation in both foreign and domestic, where our space is being crowded, as you said, in warfare. People are hearing these echo chambers of dis and misinformation. So how do we promote more normative behaviors? How do we make sure that the candidates that are running for office, the people who are head of companies, are actually speaking truthfully and are responding to, as we do with our candidates' principles, are responding to security, validity, fairness in an election cycle. So the misinformation is not being repeated, not just online, but by actual individuals. And the third area we're looking for is altering behaviors. How do we teach media literacy? How do we set an inoculation theory in practice? Because when you look at, if you're looking at healthcare and you get a vaccine because it's going to inoculate against something, how do you actually make sure that your 90-year-old parents understand how to read what's coming through? Your teenagers aren't just taking everything online for granted. How do you learn how to discern the difference of what they're hearing? And so those are the areas that we're working in primarily. And we do it in all of our elections. So we've worked in 115 elections in 40 countries, and now we're working in the US as well. But all of our elections now look through a lens of what's happening online.
Yeah, no, it's true. I have a mother, an aging mother, and a teenager.
Don't we?
And I see, my mother watching one television channel over and over again. She'll tell me, "Did you hear about such and such?" And I'll say, "Well, that's kind of one side of the story." And my kids will see something online and think it's,
Exactly.
gospel. They've gotten better, I think, as we go forward in figuring out a lot of what's online isn't true. But Pat Kondo, great name, by the way. There should also be a TV show, Pat Kondo.
There you go.
Ace Detective.
There you go.
Anyway, at the end of the day, this is all about technology now. And part of it is the idea part, right? Why is somebody propagating some idea that's nefarious or wrong? But then there's the catching it, identifying it, understanding it, and that's a data question. Seeker does some of that. And I was wondering if you could tell everybody why you started it and what it does and what you think needs to happen to sort of scale what you're trying to do.
Yeah, so we started Seeker right after we understood what happened with Cambridge Analytica and how it mined data so easily in a free country like ours and began to use it to influence a variety of different things. Some of them seem innocuous, like commerce, but some of them are much bigger, like policies, directions that people think. And then we saw Brexit, and Brexit again, same kind of thing occurred where public opinion was swayed and votes are, elections are won and lost by a small margin these days. So anything like that can have a huge effect. And we said, what would be the easiest way to bring this attention to the public? And of course, we had 4 years or 5 years of quite a bit of social unrest and upheavals. But in the middle of all of that, what we did was we looked at all the sources of news we could, 30, 40,000 sources, and in real time, we began to analyze human communication and analyze at the article level what's really being said. And we looked at it from two vectors. One is, what are principles of journalism that are really solid that everybody would say, we wish they existed again? And second are cognitive biases. And then we built a neural network that combined the two together when it saw the article and would give it a rating, very similar to what you would get.
So let me just interrupt you. So I think I know what a cognitive bias is, but
you just mentioned what your mother said.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I like this. I'm going to keep seeing more and more of it.
Okay.
Pretty soon, I believe that's the only thing happening.
Right.
And my blinders are on, and I keep getting fed that. So these.
I hope she's not watching, by the way.
And by the way, these techniques have been known a long time. Vance Packard talked about it in the 50s about television advertising and things. So these are well-known techniques. They just applied at scale. Yeah. But so we built this platform to handle that. We've got tens of billions of news articles, podcasts, video platforms that we look at. Now we've become experts at separating what I would call signal from the noise. And once we can do that, we can start to dive into very deep things like looking for signs of human trafficking, looking for refugee movements, looking for the presence of, let's call it violence, where it doesn't appear obvious. Or in podcasts, we look for abusive behavior as a sign. So all these things we were able to model out and put a simple score on it, and we try to educate people on the other end, and we put levers on it. So if you want to see something that the right says versus the left and see how far apart our country is, you can do that. And hopefully it brings people together.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, on a similar vein, John, you were I would say a tech pioneer early on. After working for George H.W. Bush, you made the right move and went into tech and
thought I should get a real job, yeah.
Yeah. But you've decided to put your knowledge to the, addressing this question of these single perspectives being used and the lack of context, the lack of trust really in information, and have also created a way to kind of sort through that information. Tell everybody a little bit about AllSides, what it is, how it works.
Yeah, and I should probably go back to the why as well, because we started a little bit earlier at it. I love your point about ecosystem, but back when I was at Netscape, so for younger people, there was this browser that happened before Chrome and
like a VHS
Firefox.
tape.
Yeah, and but back in '97, that's when I joined Netscape, and I became the lead of the browser team. But I also had read a book and was thinking about how does information flow. For journalists, you might know something called amusing ourselves to death. And they were concerned about moving news from the written word to video and TV and how it becomes sensational and kind of crap. And they had a point. But back then, I was wondering, what will the internet do? So from that point, I was studying and was thinking that the internet might actually train us to discriminate against each other in new ways. We now talk about filter bubbles and tribal polarization. But the point of the concept is that the way the information flows, the medium, really drives what's getting flowed. So the fact that we are in this new technology is driving a lot of these new problems. The problems already existed, but not just algorithms, but AI, but just the whole network is actually in its current state, the technology in its current state is what's driving this. And so AllSides was founded really to solve that problem. I mean, we have a global crisis of credibility. We don't know what to believe, or we believe things that aren't true, or at least partially aren't true, and are 1,000% convinced we're correct. And to do that, we do a lot of similar types of work, but we kind of take a little different approach where we automatically show you the different perspectives in order to enable all of us to decide for ourselves. So if we enable people to do something that's really hard to do today, I mean, I don't know what to believe. I don't know how to fight through this huge chaos
So you don't believe in alternative facts?
No, well, I don't. It's odd. There's so much stuff out there. How does anybody know what's alternative or real?
Right.
And there are different approaches you could take. You could take the Ministry of Truth approach. And I think that people in power should work at getting the good information out. But frankly, ministries of truth either aren't trusted or frankly aren't credible themselves or become corrupted over time. Or you go to the other extreme and you have an anarchy and a laissez-faire approach. And what that happens is that the people who have the most power or the most money tend to manipulate it for their own purposes. Yeah. So what you need is a balancing platform in between that enables anybody who wants to, anywhere on the planet ideally, to understand an issue well enough to decide for themselves. And in that case, you put a bright light on the complete inaccuracies, but you don't just say don't listen to it, because if you, Duke University and others have studied that the reaction to that is actually reinforcing the very thing you're trying to stop. A lot of that happened around measles vaccination, where people were starting to be hesitant to get vaccinated for measles, and then COVID. A lot of that was propelled by people who did not want to talk about it, just get a shot, damn it.
Right.
And that actually had the opposite result of the intention.
Interesting.
So creating a system where people are capable of deciding for themselves and having faith in people to do that is.
So how does someone access your information?
Well, we're pretty easy. We're just allsides.com.
Okay.
And when you look at the site, it looks just like a political site, but we actually, most of our news and money and everything else, actually, traffic goes through partners as we enable them to provide better information. And even what's often missed is it's just not data, it's just not information, it's our relationships.
Yeah.
We human beings, particularly those of us on stage, think we're really smart. But as human beings, we actually decide emotionally, intuitively. And so we also need to have the ability, which we're working on and have done with others at scale, to be able to understand and appreciate somebody different than we are. And once that happens, then we can listen. Then we can really reason and think and decide for ourselves. And that is a platform and an ecosystem that's necessary to make all these things work. Yeah.
I mean, definitely, in terms of the question of who is a journalist today is also an interesting one. And I wanted to ask you, Paige, about, you talked about their journalistic standards, right, that one is supposed to have. Then there's the sort of self-identified journalist who's really not a journalist, that is putting out information. What is there a label? Is there something that can be done? Is it just, I mean, what do we do about it?
Well, we have citizen journalists. I mean, everybody can put whatever they want online, but we need these checks and balances because people exist in their echo chamber and they continue to read the people they think are speaking truth to power. And we talk about all of these things being self-evident, but nothing is self-enforcing. We don't have a system that is overarching, telling us what we can and can't listen to. And that gives us agency, and that gives us a reason for being able to make decisions on our own. But if we don't have something out there like AllSides, if we don't have people sort of explaining what the truth is, because people don't want vaccines, that's fine. But you can't just say, just as I could not say to a child, you must do this. That is not empowering. Everyone wants agency. Everyone wants to make their decisions. So to the extent that a journalist, whether it's a real journalist or a citizen journalist who's just posting something online, can explain fully, and if there's media literacy and digital literacy, so people know to scratch a little bit below the surface, you can get that. You just, there's a level of again, that digital literacy and the media literacy, so people can discern the difference.
So Liz, you've been in the communications space for most of your career, and in the old days, it was you could move the needle with a press release. Like here's what's in the press release, and the people in the White House are fighting to get certain words in a speech, as if getting those words in the speech is going to be what matters. Now it seems that video has overtaken a lot of the megaphone in terms of we've seen it used for good to identify when bad things happen, but we've also seen it where videos are increasingly clipped and manipulated to just misrepresent the truth. They'll take a soundbite from a Senate hearing and say, this guy, is lying and all of this stuff. But the State Department, it's very hard to think about video, both as an offense and a defense context. But is there anything we can do about understanding the power of video in our public diplomacy?
Thank you for this question, because the short answer is yes, and it may actually be an unexpected answer that is at least in my mind here, which is we at the State Department are realizing that we need to be much less precious about using our own channels. We have 1,200 social media accounts, and that's great. But what we're seeing all over the world, especially from young people, is that our job is to start to figure out where they already are and not expect them to come to us. So there's a lot of work for governments, for companies. Obviously, every organization out there is thinking, how do I reach the people that are talking to our target audiences? And so to your point, a lot of what we're trying to do is really work with third parties, work with influencers, the word that everybody loves to overuse. But I really think that the question of who is your messenger and not just what your message is sort of the key question in communications these days. I'll tell you really quickly, yes, checks and balances and places where people can go to get truthful information are critically important, but it's not going to be enough, right, to scale. And I will say we poll audiences all over the world to understand our audiences. By the way, this is, I think and hope, going to be a good application for AI for us, for communicators. It's not just that AI is going to scale disinformation, but on the positive side, AI is going to provide an enormous analytics and measurement capability for us. But what's interesting is youth in particular don't view mis and disinformation as something that will be or can be eradicated. And so instead, they're learning to live with it. So we should learn to live with it in a way that changes how we communicate to people.
Right.
And I would argue that, too, that the missing skill is critical thinking, and it's not taught early enough on in our education system so that when you see something that doesn't make sense, do a little research before you fall into it. And that seems to be lost in today's day and age. But if you start with critical thinking at an early age, by the time they are out there and these decisions have a material effect on what they want to do, they'll be well informed.
Well, and that used to be the role of our universities, was to actually create dissonance and critical thinking and disagreement. And
there's actually a lot of interest in doing that earlier.
So,
I was about to
earlier.
say elementary school.
And it's actually been wonderful because when we first started AllSides, I joke we were on the bleeding edge. That's when you're in technology, you're too early and nobody's ready for you. It's kind of painful. But what we found is that schools were particularly interested in critical thinking and media literacy. And in fact, we started a little schools program on a dime, and then within about a year and a few months, all 50 states were using the different schools. Because there's a huge unmet demand among teachers as well as the administration to actually help kids figure out how to navigate this world. And part of what we're doing is not just educating kids, but also educating adults, because we don't know what's going on either. And the world is changing very quickly, so we have to learn fast.
So I see we've only got 30 seconds left. I wanted you all to look into the future 10 years from now. Is the problem of misinformation and disinformation worse or better than it is today? In terms of, there could be, I'm saying net. So there could be more people doing it, but is there a better, whether it's critical thinking, whether it's your platforms, whether it's our country's ability to, control the narrative, not control the narrative, but to have its narrative heard, whether it's our democracy? Are you, 10 years from now, are we?
Sure, I am optimistic, because I would not be in this business if I could not see the glass half full. But I do think it's the youth. I think it's the critical thinking that's necessary for younger people, because it educates both up and down. And so I'm optimistic.
I think the information space only gets more complicated and more muddied. I do think that means personal relationships and personal networks are where we have to spend a lot of time investing, because at the end of the day, people's friends, families, neighbors, trusted people, doctors, pastors, et cetera, will be the way they get the most credible information, and that makes the work that we do, particularly with exchanges, important.
That's going to make Thanksgiving really fun.
Yeah.
I think democracies will have to learn to improve their understanding of information, because 2/3 of the world are not democracies, and they're going to continue to flood us with everything they can to disrupt it. So it really becomes our responsibility as a democracy to train and educate and get the citizens informed. It's not something that we should sit lightly on, because 2/3 of the world want what we have.
Which is why it's so important we come together as a country.
Yeah.
I'm generally an optimist, and I am, but it's really a choice, frankly. I'm more optimistic now because when we were worried about this a long time ago, nobody else was, and now everybody is. And it's kind of like an addict. The first step is recognizing you have a problem. So we now recognize we have a problem. And it's frankly within our ability to pave the future. And so I'm not just trying to predict the future, we're trying to build it to be a better place.
Well, thank you all very much. Fascinating discussion. Really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Nice to meet you, Pat. Yeah.